Hello viewers and subscribers. In this tutorial we're going to learn all about events and actions. Events, or in my case lack of events, make up a part of our everyday life. Events and actions essentially make up the features of your video game. For instance, if you have a character in the game and you want to make it so that whenever the player clicks the left mouse button that character shoots a bullet, an example of an event would be when the player clicks the left mouse button. And then an example of an action would be when the bullet comes out of the gun. You could almost look at it like this. A lack of events and actions in your life is almost like a lack of features in your life. My life has a lot of features. For instance, in order for your game to work, you're going to need at least one room. When you have a room, you can use backgrounds and tiles to make up the level and the design of your room. And then you can use objects to interact with the game world. So notice I have three resources loaded up for this tutorial. I have a sprite called SPR_player. I have an object called OBG_player. And then I assigned the player sprite for this player object. Then I have a room called RM_level. RM stands for room. So when I created this room, I went into the settings tab to rename the level. So you can set the name of your room right here under the settings tab. You can also change the size of the room by changing the width and the height. So let's go ahead and add our player object into the room by going into objects. Then we can choose from this box what object we want to set in the room by just clicking in the box, choosing our object, and placing it wherever we want to place it. Alright, so now we can test our game by going to Target, making sure Windows is chose, or whatever format you want to test it in. Then you can click this green play button. So let's go ahead and click this and check our game out. So automatically GameMaker is going to load the first room that's on your list. So if you have multiple rooms over here, then the first room that you have in the list is the one that's going to load. So here is our room, or here's our game rather. We have our room, we have our object, but our object doesn't do anything. This is our player, but we can't move him around. He can't shoot bullets. He can't do anything. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you some events and actions on how we can give our player functionality. Let's go ahead and close this and open up our object player. So we need to do all the programming in this object for him to work. Now notice we have two panels here. We have one called events and the other called actions. So events and actions, in other words, when this happens, an event, make this happen, an action. So if we do something like click the arrow keys, then we want an action to happen. We want him to move. So everything we want our objects to do, we have to specifically tell GameMaker to do it. Down to the T, everything we want it to do, we have to be very specific with GameMaker. So to add an event, you can click this Add Event button, or you can just right click in this box and then choose Add Event. So when you open up, you get a whole bunch of different events that you can add. Let's just go over a few of them. Create event. This one you'll be using a lot. In almost every object you could be using the create event. A create event means an event like when the object is first born or created. Now there's two ways your object can be created. One is when your room starts and then your room creates the objects that you already have set in your room. For example, we have our room called RM_level. Well, when the game loads, first it's going to create the room, then it's going to create the object, or birth the objects in that room. The other place objects are created is somewhere in your game where you tell the game to create an object. So later on in the game we could say, okay, create this object, and it will create the object, then run whatever we have going on in the create event. Don't get confused, I'm going to explain more of this in detail later on. Other events that we have is like a mouse event. So we can click this and there's a whole bunch of different mouse events that we have. For instance, when we press our left mouse button, or our mouse hovers over the object right here in mouse enter and mouse leave. Those are two different events we could use. So that's useful if we want to left press the mouse button and have our player shoot a bullet. Well, then we'd use an event like in here. Next is destroy event. This is when the object is destroyed or taken out of the game. We can run an event called the destroy event and do an action when that happens. There's also a whole bunch of other events that you can familiarize yourself with. Like you can do an event when the game starts or when the game ends, or if the object ventures outside of our room. Okay, another event is alarms. Now you can have up to 11 alarms in your object, and I'm going to do tutorials specifically on alarms, but this is basically almost like a timer. So you can set it somewhere in your object to say, okay, in 60 seconds do this action. So that's just an example, and we'll be going over all that later. Then we have a draw event, which allows us to draw cool things like text. We can change our font, we can draw other sprites around the game. There's a whole bunch you can do in the draw event. We have our step event, which I'll be going over that in another tutorial soon. Then we have our key press event. So this is when we press a key in with our keyboard. So let's say we press the space bar and we want our spaceship to shoot a laser beam or something. We would use a keyboard press event. Next we have our collision event. This is when our object collides with another object. So we can define what object we want it to collide with and then what action to do when it collides. So let's say two car objects crash into each other, then we want them to crash. So we would use a collision event for that. Next is key release, which this is again with dealing with keyboards. We can use a key release event to say, okay, when we release a key, then do an action. Then we have our keyboard event. This is when we're holding a key down, we can have them do a certain event. And then when it releases, it'll automatically stop that event. Okay, last we have async. This is more advanced. We'll do tutorials on this later on. This lets us call in resources that are outside of our game. For instance, we could load up a graphic that is on the internet, and we can import it into our game while our player is playing it using an HTTP async event. We'll go into that later on, but this just gives you an idea and kind of whets your appetite about what all GameMaker has to offer. So we have all these different events to learn. Take your time, have fun learning them. It's a lot to take in, but it's fun to learn it all. So let's just go ahead and add a random event and action, and I'll show you some GML code real quick. So let's create a key press event. Choose that, and let's choose the enter key. Actually, you know what? I'm not gonna use a key press event. No, I'm gonna change it. Let's use a mouse event. Let's use a mouse left press event. I'm getting calls on my cell phone while I'm trying to do a tutorial. Okay, so let's use a mouse left press event. So there you go. It automatically added that event. Now this event basically says when we click on our object. Okay. Now over here in actions, we have all these different actions that we can choose from in all these different categories. We have our move actions, which can, you know, add direction to our player and let them move around the room and everything. You have all these different actions you can use, and these are called drag and drop actions. Now personally, I don't use drag and drop, and I don't teach drag and drop. I think it's a waste of time to learn drag and drop. I would rather you just use the built-in GameMaker language coding that GameMaker has to offer you, because you're going to want to learn it anyway. So a lot of people would say you should, as a beginner, learn with drag and drop. I don't think you should. I think you should just completely ignore all these actions. That's me personally. I've been using this for years and years and years. I'm going to teach you the code, because the code of GameMaker allows you to do a lot more and gives you a lot more control than these drag and drop actions. So to add code, you want to go to this control tab, and then you can see this code right here section, and add that first icon in, and just drag it into your actions box, and then this code window will come up, and we can begin adding code into our object. This is the code I'm going to show you today. Show _message, and then we're going to add these parentheses, and then within the parentheses we're going to do double quotations, and we're going to end this code with a semicolon. Okay, now within the parentheses we can write out a message. So let's write out hello world, exclamation mark. So here's our event that when we click on our player, then do this action, and in our action we have show message, which is going to give us a pop-up of a message. So let's go ahead and test it out. Let's play our world. Okay, here it is. Now when we click on our object, we get a message, hello world. We can click on him as many times as we want. He's always going to have that event, and it's always going to work. Okay, I hope you guys learned something. In the next tutorial, we're going to learn about movement. Now this is a good tutorial, probably what you guys have been waiting for. How do we make our player move around the game world? So I will see you guys next tutorial.